March 15, 1987. Anchorage, Alaska. A frozen wasteland where secrets should disappear forever. But one killer was about to learn that in the modern age of forensic science, the dead have voices that echo louder than screams. Cheryl Chapman's world shattered with a phone call. Her sister Nancy Newman hadn't shown up for work. Reliable Nancy, who never missed a shift. Nancy's abandoned car in the parking lot told a story that made Cheryl's blood freeze. Something was terribly wrong. Racing them through empty Anchorage streets, Cheryl and her husband Paul felt dread clawing at their throats. The apartment door hung unlocked. Coffee mugs from Friday night sat abandoned. Breakfast bowls half-eaten. But it was the brown cigarette butt, a brand Nancy never smoked, that sent ice through Paul's veins. Then came the discovery that would haunt them forever. Nancy Newman, 30 years old, beaten and strangled in her own bed. 8-year-old Melissa, bound with pillowcases, sexually assaulted. 3-year-old Angie, her throat slashed so viciously she was nearly decapitated. This wasn't murder. This was obliteration. Detective Sergeant Michael Grimes stared at crime scene photos that defied human comprehension. Blood spatter patterns revealed a methodical killer who had moved room by room, victim by victim, consumed by uncontrolled fury. The level of violence spoke of someone who knew no boundaries, no mercy. FBI profiler Judd Ray arrived like a specter, his reputation for diving into the darkest corners of human psychology preceding him. One glance at the carnage, and Ray's assessment was chilling. This wasn't over. This level of violence meant the killer would strike again. Soon. The profile emerged with terrifying clarity. White male, early 20s, history of sexual assault, known to the victims. Someone with access. Someone they trusted. The killer wasn't a stranger lurking in shadows. He was family. Kirby Anthony, 23 years old, John Newman's nephew, recently fired from a fishing boat after a violent confrontation. He'd been staying with the Newmans until Nancy asked him to leave just weeks before the murders. When Detective Grimes delivered news of his family's death, Anthony's reaction was theatrical performance art. Wailing, moaning, grabbing his hair in anguish. But his eyes remained bone dry. Not a single tear. The first red flag in what would become a parade of deception. 3,000 miles away, FBI hair and fiber expert Doug Diedrich was conducting his own investigation into 300 pieces of evidence. Every strand of hair, every microscopic fiber, the killer thought he'd washed away. What Diedrich would find would become Anthony's death warrant. A single washcloth held the key to everything. Clinging to its damp surface was a pubic hair with partial egg casing, the kind associated with genital lice. The killer had cleaned himself at the crime scene, leaving behind microscopic breadcrumbs that would lead directly to his door. When Anthony voluntarily submitted hair samples, confident in his innocence, Diedrich made connections that sealed his fate. The hair matched. 9 other pubic hairs found throughout the apartment matched. Facial hairs on all 3 victims matched. Anthony's DNA was scattered through the crime scene like a signature written in blood. Anthony's explanation crumbled under scrutiny. His story was that he'd showered there a week before the murders to avoid spreading his condition. But his lies were piling up faster than Alaska snow. And he didn't even realize the avalanche building above him. At a local bar, drinking and trying to impress a woman, Anthony's ego became his executioner. He revealed details that made the woman's blood freeze. How Nancy was forced to watch part of the assault. How little Angie had been stabbed. Details never released to the public. Details only the killer could know. The surveillance team watching Anthony heard every damning word. His stories kept changing. His alibis kept shifting. John Newman's missing camera appeared in Anthony's possession. Rolled coins from Nancy's tip jar. His palm print on the wall above Melissa's bed. His fingerprint on the back of Nancy's bedroom door, positioned as if someone had slammed it shut while escaping. The evidence was suffocating him like Arctic ice, and Anthony could feel the walls closing in. When pressure became unbearable, Anthony did exactly what FBI profiler Ray predicted. He ran. The walls were closing in, evidence mounting like a tsunami of guilt. And his carefully constructed lies were crumbling faster than he could rebuild them. Panic replaced arrogance as he realized the noose was tightening around his neck. He told his roommate he was leaving town and begged him not to tell police. But conscience is a powerful force, and 7 hours later, the betrayal was complete. The roommate's call to Detective Grimes would become the final thread that unraveled Anthony's desperate escape plan. Anthony was heading for the Canadian border, driving through Alaska's unforgiving landscape with the desperation of a cornered animal. 8 hours of frozen wilderness lay between him and freedom, between him and getting away with triple murder. The race against justice had begun, and time was his only remaining ally. Behind him, law enforcement agencies across 2 countries mobilized with military precision. Radio chatter crackled across the frozen expanse as officers coordinated the manhunt. Every border crossing, every checkpoint, every possible escape route was being sealed off like a steel trap closing around its prey. U.S. Customs received the alert with minutes to spare. When Anthony calmly approached the border crossing, he had no idea his 7-hour head start had evaporated like morning frost. No idea that his friend's conscience had sealed his fate. His composed demeanor masked the terror clawing at his chest. The fear of a killer who finally understood he had nowhere left to run. The handcuffs clicked shut with the finality of a coffin lid. Charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder, 2 counts of sexual assault, and kidnapping. Anthony's outrage focused bizarrely on the kidnapping charge, as if that was the worst accusation against him. Even in defeat, his priorities revealed the twisted mind that had orchestrated such horror. The man who had brutally murdered 3 innocent family members was more outraged by a kidnapping charge than by the lives he had stolen. June 3rd, 1988. The courtroom buzzed with electricity as the trial entered its 8th week. Anchorage had never witnessed anything like it. Cutting-edge forensic science combined with psychological profiling, all centered on the brutal murder of a beloved family. John Newman sat in the front row, weathered hands clasped tightly. Day after day, he had listened to horrific details of how his nephew had destroyed his world. The young man he'd welcomed into his home, given shelter when he had nowhere else to go, had repaid kindness with unimaginable cruelty. The prosecution built their case like master architects constructing an inescapable fortress. Doug Diedrich methodically explained how microscopic hairs had traveled through the apartment, creating a timeline of terror that no amount of lying could erase. Detective Grimes recounted Anthony's bizarre reaction. Theatrical grief without tears, constantly changing alibis, lies accumulating into mountains of guilt. Anthony's defense team had nothing. How do you explain fingerprints on bedroom walls? How do you justify bodily evidence throughout a crime scene he denied ever entering? How do you account for stolen items in his possession or the suspicious timing of his flight attempt? The jury carried the weight of 3 innocent lives on their shoulders. 12 ordinary citizens who understood they were about to condemn a young man to spend his life behind bars. The evidence was overwhelming, but the gravity of their decision was not lost on anyone. Anthony's confident demeanor cracked as the jury filed back into the courtroom. Gone was the cocky young man who had volunteered hair samples. Certain he had outsmarted everyone. In his place sat someone finally understanding that his carefully constructed lies were about to collapse. The first verdict struck like a hammer blow. Guilty of murdering Nancy Newman in the first degree. Anthony's face went pale. The first crack in his armor. The second verdict followed with crushing inevitability. Guilty of murdering Melissa Newman in the first degree. His hands began to shake, the facade crumbling. The final murder verdict sealed his fate. Guilty of murdering Angela Newman in the first degree. The courtroom erupted. Each subsequent guilty count, sexual assault, kidnapping, hammered another nail into the coffin of Anthony's freedom. The clean-shaven young man who thought he had outsmarted the FBI finally understood the magnitude of his fall. 357 years in prison. A life sentence multiplied by the lives he had stolen. Justice served as cold and final as an Alaskan winter. In the end, Kirby Anthony discovered what countless killers before him had learned too late. In the modern age of forensic science, there is no perfect crime. The dead speak through microscopic evidence, and their voices demand justice that echoes through eternity.